Greetings, YouTube. Well, while brushing my teeth this morning, I found myself wondering what types of dental products would exist in a world of high fantasy and alchemy. Um, because I know that you've got great healing magics that's like supposed to take care of, your bodily injury. And you got regeneration spells that are supposed to help bring back limbs, but those are fairly high level in most systems I've ever seen. But there should be preventative things that can help keep body and soul together before you get yourself there. Minor things. The hand lotions that we use help dealing with, moisture, but what if it were out in an alchemical substance? Wouldn't that be a heck of a lot more efficient? Sure, we can have mouthwashes, but what about on chemical mouthwashes or toothpastes? Wouldn't they be more reactive, being able to do more things? And of course, you've got the whole marketing thing. I just have this mental image of like 19th century style advertisings and catalogs filled with all kinds of different competing brands of alchemical substances, um, all out there to fix all the foibles of life that advertisers have decided that need to be fixed so they can make a buck. But some of them are real in the real world. Taking care of your teeth is important. You need to brush. I use a water pick. I recommend you getting one. They're very good. They give you a degree of cleanliness that you're not going to get with floss. Not to mention a gum stimulation you're not going to get. Um, and I definitely support the idea of brushing. I use a toothpaste that has uh, helps deal with particular periodontal issues because, well, being type 2 diabetic, I have uh, periodontal issues. So think about how that could be done with alchemy or magic. So we don't have a lot of real low-level orisons, which is the divine version of cantrips that seem to do that kind of stuff. We have ones like Vigor, which helps you feel, and I think gives you like a hit point bonus, like a 1 point bonus or something. I can't remember what it does. I'd have to look it up. There is space in my head for only so much BS, I guess. Um, but there should be stuff that your average everyday person would be able to have access to through low-level spellcasters, the head witches, hedge witches, and the adepts, and things like that that just be able to handle that kind of stuff. But I also think it's a really strong argument for folk magics. Magics that are usable by ordinary people. And I don't think you see a lot of that in high fantasy. I was just looking at a game called Mythos, Mythus, and one of the things they had is that one of the magical traditions, besides the more advanced ones, is folk magic. This is the kind of small scale cantrip orison level stuff for the most part. Few of them would be considered probably first level spells and stuff, but they're not the world shaking things that everyday ordinary people use. And I think there's a real place for that in a setting. Just the common stuff. I think allowing people to have access to orisons or cantrips um, with the proper training and or proper feat uh, or class or uh, purchases of, you know what I mean, whatever system you're using makes perfect sense. Uh, there's a couple of different species in, Pathfinder and D&D that come with built-in spellcasting, the gnome, the drow, things like that. They have them built into them as long as they have a stat high enough for them to actually cast the thing in question. But if you're doing, you know, orisons or cantrips or first level spells, you only need 11 in the stat in D&D or Pathfinder. So that's quite reasonable. A lot of people are going to have an 11 that would let them access cantrips and first level spells. There's class features like in the rogue, you have a minor spellcasting ability. I think allowing everyone to have access to that kind of thing should be important, should be available. Um, Now it does mean that if you're going to have that happen, if you're going to put that baseline, like anybody can buy in to these really low level magical abilities that are just kind of everywhere. He's like this, you see somebody starting a fire with their finger, you don't think anything of it because, your brother can do that too. Big whoop. Um, you're going to have to make sure that the class features that somebody's investing, their developmental points into, whether it's, just character points or whatever, is going to have more of a boost. You're going to have to kind of bump those up just a little bit to make them a little bit more attractive. Otherwise, people are going to be like, well, why do I want that characteristic for my class if I can do it just because I'm a person? Um, but I think that kind of thing really does have a place in systems, having low-level magic that does things like keep your teeth clean and make sure that, your breath smells good and very simple things like that that should be, in my mind, part and parcel of any high fantasy setting because that kind of high fantasy level of power should just infuse its way into every facet of society. Because let's face it, it does it now. I can remember when carbon fiber was the miracle substance. Okay? It was expensive. It was new. It was, it was not something your average person was ever going to see. And I think the first time I ever saw carbon fiber hit something that would be even vaguely considered to be a commercial product was for like high-end tennis rackets being used by like, the, the Olympic level athletes and things like that. There's carbon fiber right there. What's it doing? Nothing. It's it's just an inlay in my knife handle. That's it. It's it's serving no other purpose. It's just the knife handle inlay now. It is so ubiquitous and common, it has just become something that is purely aesthetic. All right? So that's what happens in the real world, and I think we should be seeing that in a high fantasy setting, where if magic exists, it is eventually going to work its way into everything, and it's just going to become an ordinary aspect of life. And I don't have a problem with magic being the equivalent of technology. I really don't. I loved the fact in uh, the second series for the whole End Airbender universe, where we had Korra moving the timeline forward, um, showed how all the different bending traditions had changed and evolved in that intervening time. And it was only like, what, 50 years, I think? Or like 40 years, something like that? 50 years, I think it was. How they had advanced in that time. And having it set in like this pseudo 1930s environment was genius. I have other things to say about that series, but the point is I loved the way they moved that forward, and what had been rare in the past, metal bending, was now much more common. And while metal bending is one aspect of earth bending, so they discovered an entire new one with lava bending. It's an example of how high fantasy magic, which is very common, even if not in that world by a specific strata of people, had still evolved and gotten more ubiquitous, and it gotten to the point where it was literally being used to generate power on an industrial scale. That's cool. Um, or hot if you want to think about it, because fire ban. That's a joke. But so yeah, just brushing my teeth got me thinking about the folk magic I had read about the other day, and got me thinking about we should really need to see more of that in a setting to make sure that our teeth are clean and our breath is fresh and our ears don't have wax. And these are things people are going to want magic to do because these are things that people have in our world purchased things specifically to deal with. I have a water pick. I have a toothbrush. I have toothpaste. I have a little cleaning widget that lets me clean my ears safely. So we have these things. Why wouldn't you have it in a high fantasy setting as well? Not to mention, you can actually have many of the real world mundane things in a high fantasy setting, and I don't think we see them often. Just go get yourself a copy of a 19th century catalog, or even early 20th century, like in the first 10 years of the century. And all of those items, for the most part, should exist in some capacity in that high fantasy setting because the technology to produce them already exists. In fact, the high fantasy setting could arguably be considered far more advanced than our world was in the pre-electric era, or before electrification became very, very common. I understand there were places that had electricity by the end of the 19th century. Um, but yeah, so let's talk about the folk magic, the small spells, the things that help us keep our teeth clean and our breath fresh, and make sure that our no one sees the fact that our roots are actually not brown.